Welcome back, everyone. We've got an exciting deep dive on tap today, all about bovine neurology.
Always a fascinating area.
We've had a few requests to dig into a recent research article focusing on a potential new biomarker for diagnosing those tricky neurological infections in cattle.
Ah, yes, I saw that one. Very interesting study.
It's titled Cerebrospinal Fluid L-lactate as a diagnostic marker for infectious-inflammatory disorders in the central nervous system of cattle. It was published in Frontiers in Veterinary Science just last month.
A team from the University of Turin in Italy led the research.
They were looking into whether L-lactate, which we find in both blood and CSF, could be a reliable indicator of CNS infections.
Exactly, because those bacterial infections of the central nervous system are a real concern in cattle.
Absolutely. They can lead to all sorts of serious neurological problems.
And of course, rapid diagnosis and treatment are crucial for the best chance of recovery.
We know that the traditional methods, like CSF analysis and bacterial cultures, can sometimes be slow and inconclusive. So what were they hoping to find with this study?
Their main goal was to see if this L-lactate, measured in the cerebrospinal fluid, could be used as a reliable marker for pinpointing CNS infections.
The hope is that this could give us a faster, more accurate diagnostic tool than what we've been using.
That's the idea. They had a pretty good-sized group of cattle involved, too.
How many?
27 healthy cattle as a control group.
Okay, so a good baseline.
And then 86 cattle with neurological symptoms.
So a good mix to work with.
They measured the L-lactate levels in both blood and CSF samples from all the animals.
Using one of those handheld devices.
Yep. They wanted to get those results quickly. Then they did a bunch of statistical analysis to see if there was any correlation between the L-lactate levels and the presence of an infection.
All right, let's get to the good stuff. What did they find?
Well, one of the first key findings was that they were able to establish a normal reference interval for L-lactate in the CSF of those healthy cattle.
That's important, right? Having that baseline to compare against.
Absolutely. In this study, they determined that the normal range was between 1.1 and 2.4 millimoles per liter.
Okay, so that gives vets a starting point for interpretation.
Right. And when they looked at the cattle showing neurological symptoms, they found that the animals with confirmed or suspected CNS infections had significantly higher levels of L-lactate in their CSF.
Much higher than the healthy cattle.
Yep. That's a pretty strong initial indication that those L-lactate levels could be a warning sign, a red flag for an infection.
Sounds promising.
It gets even more interesting when you look at a specific immune response.
Okay, tell me more.
They found that the highest CSF L-lactate levels were seen in cases where there was also what's called neutrophilic pleocytosis.
Now, I know that's a mouthful. Can you break that down for us?
Sure. Neutrophilic pleocytosis basically means there's a big influx of neutrophils, a type of white blood cell, into that cerebrospinal fluid.
So the body's immune system is kicking into gear.
Exactly. It's a sign that the body is actively fighting off an infection, especially a bacterial one.
So it sounds like a high L-lactate level, combined with neutrophilic pleocytosis, is a strong indicator of a bacterial infection in the central nervous system.
That's what the research is suggesting. Based on their statistical analysis, the researchers found that a CSF L-lactate level above 3.15 millimoles per liter was a very good predictor of this neutrophilic pleocytosis.
How good.
They determined that this threshold had a sensitivity of 93% and a specificity of 80%.
Wow. So this could really be a game changer in how we approach these tricky neurological infections in cattle.
I think so. Imagine being able to quickly and accurately diagnose a CNS infection right there on the farm.
Using just a handheld device.
Right. No more waiting for lab results from those time-consuming cultures.
Earlier diagnosis means we can start treatment earlier, which could save lives.
And potentially reduce the need for more invasive diagnostic procedures down the road.
Plus, it seems like this research also offers some interesting insights into the connection between the nervous and immune systems.
Definitely. It sheds some light on how L-lactate plays a role in the inflammatory response within the brain itself.
Very cool. But I'm sure there's still some questions to be answered, and more research to be done.
Oh, absolutely. This study was done on a specific population of cattle.
So we need to make sure these findings hold true in other breeds and ages of cattle.
That's the crux of the matter. We want to confirm these results in different populations to be sure the test is reliable across the board.
What else do we need to look into?
Well, we need to delve deeper into the specific mechanisms at play here. How is L-lactate production linked to the activity of different immune cells within the CSF? And another big question is, does the type of bacteria causing the infection actually affect those L-lactate levels?
So could that information help us choose which antibiotic would work best?
Exactly. Think about it moving away from those broad-spectrum antibiotics and picking the most effective treatment based on what the L-lactate is telling us about that underlying infection.
That'd be a big step forward for antimicrobial stewardship too, wouldn't it?
For sure. Helping us fight that antibiotic resistance problem. This research opens up a whole new path, not just for diagnosis, but for how we think about treatment.
I know to really get into the nitty-gritty of this study, they use something called receiver operating characteristic analysis, or ROC analysis.
Yeah, ROC analysis, a classic. It's a powerful tool for evaluating how well a diagnostic test can tell the difference between two groups.
So in this case, they're looking at how CSF L-lactate levels can tell the difference between cattle with and without that neutrophilic pleocytosis.
Exactly.
And what do they find out?
Well, they found that the area under the ROC curve, that's the AUROC, was 0.92. Which is good.
Okay, now break that down for us non-statisticians. What's that number mean?
So the AUROC basically tells you the overall accuracy of the test. A perfect test, one that nails it every time, separating those two groups, would have an AUROC of 1.
So a 0.92 means that this L-lactate measurement is a pretty darn good predictor for finding neutrophilic pleocytosis in cattle.
Yeah, you got it. And they took it a step further, too, They figured out a specific cutoff value for that L-lactate measurement.
Okay.
They determined that if that CSF L-lactate level is above 3.15 millimoles per liter, well, that's a strong sign of neutrophilic pleocytosis.
So that's the magic number, the one that can really help vets make that diagnosis out in the field.
Pretty much. And with that cutoff, they found the sensitivity was 93% and the specificity was 80%. We talked about that a bit before.
Yeah, just to remind everyone, what does that mean?
Right. So sensitivity, that's all about the test's ability to correctly find the animals that actually have that condition, in this case, the neutrophilic pleocytosis. 93% sensitivity means it got it right 93 times out of every 100 cattle that actually had it.
So it doesn't miss many of those true positives.
Nope. And specificity, on the other hand, that's the test's ability to correctly ID the ones who don't have the condition.
So 80% means that 80 out of every 100 that didn't have it were correctly identified.
Right.
So it's good at avoiding those false positives, too. That's a really good combo.
Exactly. And this research, it really brings home how important neutrophils are in fighting those infections.
Right. They're like the first responders, rushing to the scene to take on those invading bacteria. How does that all work?
So when those neutrophils get to the site of infection, they release what we call neutrophil extracellular traps. Nets, for short.
Nets?
Yeah, it's kind of like they're casting a net to trap and get rid of those bacteria. And guess what? That whole process of net formation, it leads to more L-lactate being produced.
So the infection brings in the neutrophils, they release those nets, that bumps up those L-lactate levels, and then boom, we've got a way to actually measure if there's a CNS infection going on.
Nailed it. And this study helps us understand what's happening at that cellular level during these infections.
But like all good research, this one's got its limitations. What did the researchers point out?
Well, one thing they mentioned was that their healthy control group, remember those 27 cattle? They were all young Holstein Friesians.
So maybe the normal L-lactate range might be different for, say, older cows or different breeds.
Could be. More research is needed to figure out if things like breed, age, maybe even where the cattle are from geographically, if those things make a difference in L-lactate levels.
So we can make sure we've got the right reference intervals for all those different groups.
Right. And they also pointed out that they didn't actually ID the specific bacteria causing the infections.
So does the kind of bacteria matter for the L-lactate level?
Good question. We don't know yet. Could L-lactate actually help us tell the difference between different infections?
And maybe even help us choose the right antibiotics.
Right. Those are things we need to look into.
For sure. Now, there's something else interesting that came out of this research. It challenges something we've thought for a long time in, well, both human and vet med.
What's that?
This idea that if you get even a little bit of blood mixed in with the CSF when you're taking the sample, it'll mess up the L-lactate reading.
Oh, yeah, that's been the worry for ages.
But in this study,
they found no connection between those CSF L-lactate levels and how many red blood cells were in the sample.
So even if you get a little bit of blood in there, the L-lactate measurement is still reliable.
Seems that way. And that could be a big deal for vets out in the field.
Yeah, because getting a perfect, clean CSF sample isn't always easy.
Especially not when you're working with animals out on a farm. This finding could give vets more confidence in those readings, even if there's a tiny bit of blood.
Makes it a more practical tool.
Exactly.
So much good stuff coming out of this research. A potential new biomarker, a better understanding of how the immune system responds, and even challenging some of those old assumptions about blood contamination.
It really shows how important it is to keep asking questions and keep learning.
What's next? How do we take this knowledge and actually make a difference for the cattle out there?
Well, the next step is to see how it all works in practice.
So put this L-lactate measurement to the test with real vets treating real animals.
Exactly. We need to know, can vets easily use this measurement as part of their routine diagnosis? Does it really speed up treatment and lead to better outcomes for those cattle struggling with these infections?
That's the real test, isn't it? Moving from a research setting out into the field where things are a lot more complicated.
Absolutely. It takes those real-world studies to confirm that this test is practical and effective for all kinds of cases.
And we need more research to dig into those unanswered questions we've been talking about.
Yeah. There's so much more to discover.
Like,
Well, we need to really understand the link between L-lactate and specific types of bacteria. See if there are any variations in different cattle populations. Really get down into the details of how that whole inflammatory process works within the CNS. Lots to explore.
it feels like we're only just starting to understand how powerful this L-lactate measurement could be for bovine neurology.
It is exciting. This research has opened up a whole new area of study, and who knows what we'll find next.
It's amazing to think that something as simple as measuring L-lactate could completely change how we diagnose and manage these tough neurological infections.
It shows you how even the smallest discoveries can have a big impact.
It gives me hope for a future where we can really help those animals that are suffering from these conditions.
Faster diagnosis, better treatments, healthier animals, everybody wins.
That's the heart of it, isn't it? This research on L-lactate and cattle CSF is a big deal. It could change how we think about and treat these complicated neurological infections.
From Vet NeuroJar, keep those minds inspired, hearts light, and tails wagging.